The next speaker is myself. My name is Zane Veidenberga, and I am going to speak about my research transferring implied values of the Latvian source text diminutives into English, piloting translation guidelines with Novice translators. So, welcome to my presentation. I am presenting today a small part of the research that I'm doing within my PhD research. And today I'm going to tell you about the results of student experiment, translation experiment, when I piloted my guidelines for novice translators, what to do when they face Latvian diminutives in Latvian source text. In order to give you a brief background information how I have come up to this stage, I'll present my research steps. First, I did an analytical literature review on translation theory focusing on literary translation. Then I have studied the role and functions of diminutives in the Latvian language, which are widely used, and they connote very many different meanings, connotations, attitudes. Then I have studied diminutives in English, how they express diminutiveness, the category of diminutiveness in English. And in order to understand what happens when an author has used a diminutive in the Latvian source text, in Latvian prose text, what happens with them when they are translated into English. I have studied Latvian source texts and their English translations published in various anthologies in the English language. And these are published translations done by professional translators, and some of these works were also translated by authors themselves. Then, on the basis of that, I developed a translation experiment for students, and I did not inform students that I will look for the solutions that they have chosen for transferring the implied values and connotations by Latvian source text diminutives. I did it on purpose, not to let's say, disturb their perception of the text as a whole. Then, on the basis of all that, I certainly studied the transfer of the values and implied connotations of diminutives more in details. And I drafted guidelines for novice translators for transferring implied values of the Latvian source text diminutives into English in order to give some ideas, encourage them, because the results showed that more than 60% of these implied values and connotations were lost, both in student translations and also in the translations done by professional translators who translated these various Latvian prose texts into English that were published. And today, in my presentation, I am focusing on the results and findings of my second experiment, where I actually piloted these draft guidelines for novice translators. And certainly this time, research participants were informed that they have to use these draft guidelines, pilot them, see how they work during the translation process. And I also asked in a post-translation questionnaire whether these guidelines have helped them to cope with the challenges caused by diminutives, and maybe they had some suggestions for their improvement. And therefore, hopefully one of one of the outcomes of not only this study, but also of my PhD research will be guidelines for novice translators, how they can cope with Latvian source text diminutives and their implied values when they translate from English, from Latvian into English, Latvian prose texts. Just very briefly, I'd like to remind that what we understand by diminutives. First of all, diminutives express smallness, and what is more important for this particular study and what is very typical for Latvian diminutives, they express emotional coloring, personal attitude, evaluation, endearment, positive and negative attitude. And Latvian diminutives can be considered as a culture and language specific phenomenon. And in Latvian, a diminutive is a morphological category. We form diminutives with the use of suffixes, while in English, diminutives are rather an onomasiological than morphological category. And when novice translators translate Latvian text, they look at, okay, there is a diminutive used in the source text. In English, they don't use so many diminutives. We'll just skip. And sometimes it's okay, but sometimes, unfortunately, we lose a whole layer of information. We do not convey emotions and attitudes that are implied by Latvian diminutives, as sometimes they are the only markers in the source text which connote some particular information. And if in English diminutives are mainly used for nouns, then in the Latvian language we can make diminutive forms from nouns, adjectives, verbs, and other parts of other word classes. And this, as I have already said, this emotional coloring is really very, very essential. And when authors have included diminutives in their source text, it might be the way, the style of how the author expresses something. And when we translate Latvian prose texts from Latvian into English, where there are so many original works, masterpieces created in the English language. We have so many translations from different other languages. Most probably the thing that might be attractive and interesting for the readers in the English language might be this otherness, this specific worldview, or some specific, some culture-specific values that we can convey by these translations. And diminutives may be a tiny part, but still is one of those values and specific features that could express this otherness of the Latvian prose texts and Latvian literature. Just very briefly about the content of the guidelines that I have devised. First of all, certainly I have emphasized that Latvian diminutives are very context bound, and depending on the context, the implied values of the diminutives can be transferred either by using various morphological forms and not only prefixes, not only suffixes as in Latvian, but also prefixes, reduplication, rhyming reduplication, trunction, compounding, and also lexical ways of expressing the category of diminutives. For example, using adjectives little, tiny, petite, or emotionally colored nouns, adjectives, adverbs, other parts of speech. And this is just to demonstrate the length of the guidelines, because I did not want them to be very extensive, knowing that when translators translate, they don't have much time to study long, lengthy texts. This is just to initiate their thinking, encourage their creativity, and I have tried to describe some of the challenges and also given some examples in order to encourage and foster their creativeness. The texts that students translated were fragments from Kārlis Skalbes tale Bendesmeitiņa, Hangman's Daughter, and one chapter from Oswald Sebres novel Gaiļu kalna ēnā. And during the translation experiment, students recorded their think aloud dialogue protocols. They worked in pairs, and they filled in a post-translation questionnaire. And afterwards, I analyzed these translations, responses to the post-translation questionnaire, and also transcripts of the think aloud dialogue protocols, and compared these data with the translation solutions chosen by research participants. And so about the experiment procedure, potential participants were addressed personally, and this was a voluntary participation. They were instructed to work in pairs and carry out all steps one by one. And first of all, they had to get acquainted with the draft guidelines, and they were asked to record their dialogue protocols and fill in a questionnaire. And then I processed this amount of data, both quantitatively and qualitatively, and here are some results. 15 participants took part, and 8 female students, 7 male students, and only 2 of them had some experience in translating prose texts out of university settings. And what the first result that struck me when I compared the results with the first experiment results, where participants were not informed to look at the ways how they transfer the meanings of diminutives. Then if you see in the first experiment, 61% out of the source text diminutive cases were lost in translation. So quite a lot of information was lost in the translations. In the second experiment, only 16% of the diminutive cases that were used in the source text were lost. So the results are quite different, I would like to say. This is just an insight into the Excel table where I have coded all student translated text fragments and each diminutive and what methods have been, what tools have been used to transfer, and I have also written all the translation solutions offered by students. And here you see this is looking at the unit level, word or phrase level, but if we look I looked also at these translations when analyzing them qualitatively, also at the whole paragraph level, not only on word or collocation level. And here I have offered an insight into the feedback from students that the majority of them consider diminutives to be challenging for translators during the translation process. And also I wanted to emphasize that students have noticed that diminutives convey very diverse information in their in the source text, a whole array of emotions and attitudes. I have offered also a couple of examples, and I should say that I have not corrected any grammatical or spelling mistakes in students' translations. I have just shown them here as they were in the submitted experiment data. And here in the source text, you see two diminutives, kapsētiņa, which is graveyard, and upīte, which is a river. And for those who don't know this fairy tale by Carls Skalbe, the plot goes that there is a young girl who has just lost her father, and her father was a hangman who was hated by everybody because of the job what he did, and also he was a drunkard and quite a nasty person. But for this little girl, he was the only close relative, the only person who she had in this world. And now, after he has died, she is alone, and the next morning she's going to the cemetery, and the use of the source text diminutives, they do not show only the size of this graveyard and the river, but also the emotional feelings of the young girl going to the place where her only close person is now buried. And yeah, as I said, we can talk about the grammar and word choice maybe, but still I would like to draw your attention to the way, to the solution, how this student has chosen to transfer graveyard, her father dearest resting place. Yeah, this is quite a poetic way to and also transferring the atmosphere and the emotional status of the young girl. And then another example from Oswald Zebris novel, again, Ziemassvētku dieniņa, Christmas Day, a diminutive is used, and in most of the translations, students have lost this dieniņa, which also in the given context conveys the dissonance, the disagreement between the current situation this family is in and the bright Christmas, the joyful Christmas that will be tomorrow. And the way how this student has transferred the connoted meaning of Ziemassvētku dieniņa, tomorrow, the jolly day of Christmas. Yeah. Again, the student has tried to look for a kind of reformulation still containing the source text's atmosphere. And now switching to the suggestions that students have advised to improve the draft guidelines, I will switch over to my English summary. Many participants have asked for more examples and more specific descriptions of the ways how to deal with more complex cases when it is not really possible to transfer the source text connotations into the target text. And actually, I still have to work on this revision of my guidelines for novice translators, because I would like to balance between the detailed description of many specific cases and possible solutions, and the freedom of translators to make their own decisions. And at the moment, what I have concluded from this experiment and also the feedback from the students, that most probably I have to revise the wording, emphasizing more that these guidelines are for the cases when the source text diminutive connote some implied values, because there might be cases when they are just used because it is traditional to use a diminutive in this particular word combination or collocation in Latvian. Yeah, and if we give more examples into these guidelines, it might be also that it limits or restricts the creativity of translators. So I really have to find the balance between these two things, and that is why my intended future steps are to either to make a focus group or to carry out expert interviews with translator trainers and to find out their ideas on and opinions on these draft guidelines. And hopefully I'll make the final version and can put them into my doctoral thesis. Thank you for listening.